Where South Asia's arid deserts meet the Arabian Sea lies a massive stretch of physical geography largely overlooked in global economic discussions. Pakistan's 1,046-kilometer coastline grants it an exclusive economic zone, a legally recognized area of marine resources spanning 290,000 square kilometers. This zone sits adjacent to the Strait of Hormuz, a critical transit choke point handling global energy trade. Recognizing the value of ocean territories globally, the United Nations established Sustainable Development Goal 14, standardizing the concept of the blue economy. The framework defines success as the integration of economic activity with the long-term preservation of marine ecosystems. Effectively governing and monetizing this vast, highly sensitive maritime space is the single most critical untapped resource for the nation's macroeconomic survival. If Pakistan fully optimized its shipping, coastal tourism, and marine resources, global estimates suggest this maritime territory holds an economic potential of roughly $100 billion. The reality is a fraction of that figure. Currently, domestic activity across all maritime sectors generates between $4 billion and $7 billion annually. This chart compares Pakistan's maximum maritime value against actual revenue, mapping a $93 billion deficit. The starkest disparities exist here. The shipping industry leaves over $4 billion untapped, while the fisheries gap exceeds $2.7 billion. Closing a gap of this magnitude requires capital and logistics far beyond the state's internal capacity. The primary mechanism currently deployed to physically bridge this deficit is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. To understand exactly how a bilateral infrastructure project attempts to unlock ocean wealth, we have to evaluate it through a specific political science framework known as complex interdependence. Closing this economic deficit requires a structural shift in regional geoeconomic power, incorporating both physical infrastructure and the complex dynamics of international trade. The physical epicenter of this economic strategy is Gwadar Port, situated in the country's northwest region. The logistical demand for this port is severe. Roughly 95% of Pakistan's overall trade and nearly all of its petroleum imports arrive by sea. Yet the domestic shipping industry is too weak to handle the volume, forcing the country to rely on foreign transport operators for its logistical needs. The fishery sector suffers from a similar industrial bottleneck. Pakistan harvests 760 recorded species of fish and exports 71% of its total yield. However, limitations in commercial processing technology restrict the country to a 0.25% share of global seafood exports. Modernizing antiquated fleets and expanding port logistics requires a volume of technological transfer and raw capital that Pakistan cannot generate internally. China, conversely, has the capital. What Beijing requires is the geographic certainty of secure, expedited trade routes that avoid the traditional, highly monitored naval routes of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Gwadar is the precise geographic node where China's massive terrestrial infrastructure network connects with the 21st century maritime Silk Road. Pakistan controls the vital geography, China controls the vital capital. This creates a highly structured symbiosis between the two states. In 1977, international relations scholars Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye detailed the theory of complex interdependence, arguing that dense economic ties between states alter how they project power. The simplest form is symmetric reciprocity, where two nations share equal volumes of trade, granting both equal negotiating leverage. CPEC operates under a different dynamic, asymmetric reciprocity, where the economic inputs and strategic outputs are entirely unequal. This theoretical asymmetry is not abstract, it is formalized into hard policy, binding the economic futures of both governments. The core rule of an asymmetric relationship is that the lesser economic beneficiary often gains bargaining leverage, precisely because their singular asset, in this case geographic access, is irreplaceable to the larger power. Pakistan utilizes this geographic monopoly to bargain for development initiatives, securing loans, structural aid, and infrastructure funds that international markets might otherwise withhold. This diplomatic leverage translates into physical assets. It funds the integration of high-capacity container terminals and the technology required to process global shipping volumes. Through the mechanics of complex interdependence, a nation's geographic vulnerability is effectively utilized as economic bargaining power. Optimizing this infrastructure is constrained by two overlapping challenges, one domestic and one international. Internally, the coastal ports suffer from a deep infrastructural deficit inland. There is a lack of high-capacity road and railway networks necessary to transport goods from the coast to major inland economic hubs. Compounding this is an existential environmental threat. Industrial water pollution and widespread illegal fishing are actively degrading the marine biodiversity required to sustain commercial yields. This pollution directly threatens highly lucrative assets like the mangrove forests in the Sindh province, which generate $4 billion in export revenue. This immense economic value relies entirely on the continued health of the local water system. Externally, the geographic location that makes Pakistan valuable also exposes it to a volatile geopolitical environment. By integrating its ports with Chinese capital, Pakistan triggers security dilemmas with India. Simultaneously, it places the state's economic ambitions inside the broader, intensifying naval competition between the United States and China in the Indian Ocean. The success of CPEC is entirely contingent upon Pakistan's ability to address internal ecological degradation while navigating friction between three nuclear-armed powers. Navigating these dual pressures requires a policy overhaul designed to bridge the operational gap between academic marine researchers and national legislative enforcement. The foundational law of the blue economy is it must be regenerative. If marine ecosystems collapse, the commercial sectors built on top will follow. The first mandatory policy pillar is structural. The state must establish integrated maritime governance models. This eliminates overlapping jurisdictions and creates a single regulatory standard for the entire coastline. The second pillar targets capital. The government must cultivate transparent public-private partnerships to attract foreign investment, proving to international markets that the foundational growth sectors are legally secure. The third pillar focuses on enforcement at the local level. By implementing climate citizenship programs, the state can empower coastal communities to monitor their own environments, ensuring compliance with anti-pollution and biodiversity regulations. Without these regenerative frameworks locked into law, the $100 billion potential remains unreachable, leaving the maritime sector in its current state of underperformance. The final requirement for this transition is human capital. The state must integrate specialized maritime curricula into national educational institutions to prepare a workforce capable of managing deep-water economies. The individuals emerging from these programs will be required to manage highly complex logistical networks that dictate the movement of global trade. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is a mechanism utilizing the forces of asymmetric interdependence to move a historically land-focused economy out into the maritime domain. The integration of a robust blue economy does not end at the coastline. The logistical efficiency generated at the ports creates spillover benefits, opening reliable ocean access for adjacent landlocked states. The objective of this integration is to link these geographies, utilizing the ports to create functional trade corridors that connect historically isolated markets. By mastering the forces of complex interdependence and committing to uncompromising sustainability, Pakistan can transform its geographic exposure into a stable role as a regional anchor for maritime trade.